Hello, today is the July 20th, 2023, and we'll talk about two architects. We'll begin with Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach, a very important Austrian architect. Let's read a little bit about him. Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach, as you can see, was born on July 20th, 1656, and died in April 1723, was an Austrian architect, sculptor, and architectural historian whose Baroque architecture profoundly influenced and shaped the tastes of the Habsburg Empire. His influential book, A Plan of Civil and Historical Architecture from 1721, was one of the first and most popular comparative studies of world architecture. This was the man. I like to show sometimes pictures as they download, even if they are not complete. Here we see his hand, in a posture which was similar with other postures of portraits of famous people at that time and earlier. Maybe not too many architects would have the same gesture with the hand as it happened then, nor too many architects would wear this kind of enflowered attire, nor this kind of wig. But it was a different time, and he was a very important Baroque architect, and even someone resolutely modern and contemporary and iconoclast like Wolf Prix acknowledges him as being one of the most influential architects, and for him one of his preferred ones. So Fischer von Erlach, he also had a son who was also an architect, but he didn't become as famous as his father, although he collaborated with his father and even went on to work on some of the works they initiated together or worked together on after the death of his father. Some drawings of I just use his first name, let's say Johann Fischer von Erlach. These are drawings from that published work, and shows, or these drawings that I'm going to show, they show this immense curiosity about architecture in general as a phenomenon of the human spirit and the human culture beyond space and time. So his interest was encyclopedic. And I also think he was interested in a narrative architecture, something we kind of neglect these days. This is also from the same work, which was hailed as an important work on comparative architecture. But when I look at this drawing, I am tempted to reflect on, for example, a work by Su Fujimoto in California, where he placed a village on top of a more massive structure. Maybe there are offices at the bottom and at the top some housing, village-like. And in a way, this is what it is here. Not that at the bottom is an office building. No, it's not an office building, but you see this interesting juxtaposition where you have a rural configuration, if I am to say so, on top of let's call it an urban configuration. So the village is above the city, and the small is above the big. This is also an interesting, drawing of a hypostyle, forest of columns. So you know, again, we are dealing with an architect who built a lot, but who was also an intellectual with an insatiable curiosity. And this is shown by his published work. He was also a sculptor. This is the famous Karlskirche in Vienna, in Austria, for all to see. So he was a very knowledgeable architect, a man of culture, a man of ideas, a visionary, an artist. And I think, you know, this is the way to be in architecture, really. You can't function if you don't have you know, curiosity as vast as possible, and to also to have some knowledge which goes beyond the technicalities of what it means to be an architect. They are important, of course, but let's not forget what Walter Gropius said. The artist, and he included the architect here, is an exalted craftsman. So without exaltation, the architect remains at the level of craft, and that's not a little thing, because both the artist and the artisan or the craftsman root themselves in craft. But if you are to become an artist, you have to be exalted. And exaltation, unfortunately, not too many people have, and schools do not teach exaltation. They are afraid of exaltation. Because the exalted student is a rebellious student. He's a student who wants freedom, and most schools are systems. There are exceptions, but most schools are systems. Anyway, these are graphic works by Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach, talking about exaltation. Well, what else are we looking at here when we look at the top part of this graphic representation? It's exaltation. Maybe we think we are too sophisticated, so much so that we become cynical, and we think that such images are expressions of naivete. The labyrinth. I mean, you know, this scandal for reason was very tempting, even for the builders of Chartres Cathedral or Amiens Cathedral, because on the pavement of both cathedrals, both famous French cathedrals, Gothic cathedrals, there is inscribed a labyrinth. And the labyrinth is not a Christian symbol at all. And now we have a pagoda. Again, we see Fischer von Erlach, Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach, being very interested in all cultures and in all times, not just what was specific to his time and his place. And after all this graphic work, and it's not just graphic, because you see there inscriptions where, I mean, I didn't read them, but I imagine, you know, there is a relationship between what the drawing represents and what the words say. So he was a thinker, not just a, you know, just a hand that drew. I think Stephen Hall was right when he said, remain idealistic, the soul needs the ideal more than the real. And I'm afraid our time is in good measure devoid of idealism. Sculptures by Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach. In Prague, here it is. You know, we don't do this sort of thing any longer, but I don't see why we couldn't bring back sculpture to the art of architecture. In some form, maybe even abstract sculpture. Why not? Because we don't believe in narration. Our buildings actually don't say don't murmur even a story. They don't tell a story. I am imagining here that there is some meaning behind what he represented here through these sculptures, and I think there is a potential for a narrative architecture, but maybe a Copernican revolution is needed to bring narration without falling into literature, because this is the danger. Architecture is not literature, but architecture could be narrative without becoming, illustration or literature. I keep thinking about what Victor Hugo said, that the book killed the cathedral, because until Gutenberg, the proliferation of books through mass printing, the message, the narration was inscribed in the walls or on the stained glass windows of cathedrals. But once the book spread, let's call it knowledge, to the four cardinal points, the inscriptions, the knowledge that was inscribed on the walls and the stained glass windows of the cathedral when less needed. So in that sense, yes, the book killed the cathedral, but now the book is itself under assault by the media, by the internet, by the web. But I do feel that maybe narration could come back to architecture. That is, the book could return to the world. And there are already some attempts in this direction. If we think of that library that MVRDV built in China, where literally the books made it even to the ceiling. Obviously, the books were not meant to be taken away from there. So it's almost like the book seems to want to return to the world somehow, and to become world, and to become architecture. Another statuary by Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach. He was an artist, he was a sculptor, he was an architect, he was an intellectual, he had an inquisitive mind. This is the architect. This is an architect we could find inspiration in, I would say. And maybe Le Corbusier was right when he said architecture is not a profession. Architecture is a state of mind. It's still a little bit mysterious for me, a little bit cryptical what he meant. But it's interesting, no? He said it's not a profession. It's an état d'esprit. It's a state of mind. So those who suffer in a way from this state of mind are addicted to architecture even when they don't build. Such examples, Fischer von Erlach, I think are inspiring, because they restore the prestige of architecture, again, without arrogance. This is not about arrogance. This is about the cultural level towards which architects should aspire, and as presences in society that are significantly necessary. Unfortunately, I think the cultural basis of the architect is eroded, because we became specialists. We became close to Homo economicus. We became close to being either accountants or engineers, and the architect as an artist is not so often present. Somehow the artistic side of the architect is not sufficiently present. It is present in the field of exoticisms, but and here is a danger, that some people become artsy, or the difference between an artist and an artiste. I think a good architect in good measure, is an artist, but not an artist. In other words, is not speculating the glamour, the aura of what the artist is supposed to be, or we think, he or she is, but the seriousness of actually fighting for art, for the soul of art through architecture, in my opinion, is not so often met in today's world. Yes, there is the temptation of glamour, there is a temptation of the glittering aspects of success, but I'm not sure that great artists functioning in architecture are to be met with quite often in today's time. Maybe I'm too critical with my own time, but I wish we had again architects. Maybe I idealize the past, but why can't we have again architects like Bernini, for example, or Michelangelo? They were artists and then architects, but they were significant also in architecture. And if you compare the drawings, let's say you take the drawings, the sketches of some of the most important architects today, from, I don't know, Frank Gehry to Wolf Prix, and you compare them with the drawings of the great masters of the past, you see a great difference. You see sometimes spontaneity in the drawings of the contemporaries, but certainly the skill of the old masters is not there any longer. The most important architects today, the most, have some maybe animated gestures on paper, but the intrinsic artistic quality of the drawing is not really great. And I wonder why. What happened? What happened to the architect? Something happened. It is as if they don't believe any longer in the very sketches they make. Architecture. Schönbrunn Palace, of all things, because he worked for this famous palace himself, and so did his son. Maybe the inspiration coming from other palaces can be felt, but it's still a remarkable building. And maybe even more remarkable is not the palace itself, but what is where the picture is taken from is a pavilion which I visited, and it's very nice, perhaps nicer than the palace from my point of view, and the gardens, the estate itself. Vienna. Here are engravings based on his drawings of the Schönbrunn Palace. Across the street from the Schönbrunn Palace is a famous subway station by Otto Wagner. Vienna is rich in important architecture, built by important architects. I once photographed a ceremony of a marriage ceremony here at the Schönbrunn, and I couldn't enter the palace, but I photographed scenes of this ceremony through the windows. This is the pavilion I was talking about. The picture is not quite good here. It was raining hard when I visited Schönbrunn on that day, and I found refuge under the arcade of the right wing, actually, of this pavilion. Schönbrunn, Fischer von Erlach, both father and son worked on this, and other people, of course. And this is the pavilion, and large-scale fountain in front of it, and rich is for the rich. What else can we say? But now they belong to the tourists, and you see here in the foreground the Schönbrunn Palace, and in the background, far away, the pavilion on top of the hill. it amused me to take pictures of that eagle at the top, as you can see it. And I from the bottom of the hill, I attempted to photograph it as if the eagle was right on top of the hill. I managed to hide the building, so there was just the representation, the sculptural representation of the eagle on top of the hill. And I liked doing that, but taking that photograph, which unfortunately is not part of this presentation. The interior of the Schönbrunn Palace is opulent, as we expected. No question that beauty needed some money, and that money was there. The artists were there, ready to offer their services. The fountain, the interior again. Some people lived well. What can we say? Schönbrunn. This was not built by him. I wish it was, because I like very much, this building destined for plants. Its architecture, in my opinion, is almost modern, but it was not built by Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach, but by an architect later. And tourists everywhere. Now the Karlskirche in Vienna, maybe the most known building by him, a very important church. Here is the plan. When you visit it, you can sit here, you can wait for someone dear or not dear to enter through here, enter inside the church. And I did this when I went with the students. I sat in this alcove, and then the students got in, and it's a nice experience to be in the proximity of this famous church, Karlskirche in Vienna. The interior is Baroque, Austrian Baroque. Echoes from Bernini here. There were, the last time I went there was and I regret I should have had some images, because it was a nice contemporary installation inside the Baroque church built by Fischer von Erlach. I like the simultaneity of past architecture and contemporary artistic or architectonic gestures. Vienna is a sophisticated city and is not afraid of the new, but at the same time has its own conformisms. Maybe that's why the avant-garde in Vienna is so powerful, and maybe that's why Dr. Freud is connected with Vienna, because there it's this tension between two modes of being. One is conformist, and the other one is stridently almost avant-garde. So you have a conflict there, and from this conflict, a very vital culture springs. Action and reaction. Because Vienna is not just the city of grandmothers and waltzes. It's also the city of psychoanalysis, and the city of the secessionist Viennese movement, of the secessionist building by Maria Olbrich, of countless avant-garde artists who all said in their own way, through their own art, épater la bourgeoisie, shock the bourgeois. But the bourgeois is very at home in Vienna, actually. A very interesting city. I love Vienna. Although the first time when I went there, I felt sick in Vienna. Maybe by the way of Vienna, we can remember what Salvador Dali said, that he was a monarchist and an anarchist. Now, how could you be both a monarchist and an anarchist? Well, it's oxymoronic, it's paradoxical, but this paradox exists within Vienna, so it was the last empire in Europe, the Habsburgic Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and yet they had also, not much later, after the empire collapsed, a communistic Vienna, a red Vienna. How do you explain it? And I like these paradoxes and these incongruities in Vienna. And I think even Fischer von Erlach, in his own way, I mean, it's something truly very inspiring in the maybe even the anxieties of the Austrian spirit, that they conform, but at the same time there is a tendency to rebel. And this is the recipe for creativity. You have continuity and you have a break, the break of innovation. Both continuity and distancing or the break. They have great artists and great architects, and it's not such a large country. The Austrian National Library in Vienna. Now, this is a paradise for books, especially if the books are not opened. But I mean, the interior is breathtaking. In fact, it's so alarmingly beautiful that you don't feel like dislocating any book from there. There are stairs there that go to some books, but didn't I mention, Victor Hugo? Didn't I mention the book wanting to return to the wall? Well, here the book is almost like a brick that generates the world. That is architecture. That is the world. But this is more than a library. It's a museum, it's a church, it's a palace, it's a library, is an idealized version of what a gathering place for in the name of culture could be or should be. Fischer von Erlach in Vienna. Not bad. Because it's not bad, because even if you don't open a book, your soul is still vibrating. Is still singing because there is beauty. And of course, we can ask, what is beauty? But this is rather a cynical question. Your soul knows. Your eye knows. Your mind comprehends and knows. Maybe it's too sublime. Maybe it's, it looks too much like a place of privilege. And it is in a way, of course, but considering also the time when it was built, but it is inspiring. It's the glory of the human spirit represented through architecture, through the space that architecture contained, through the books that are part of the walls, through the sculptures that sing the same song like the books and like the space. It's a celebration of creativity. And the longing that creativity is. Now a palace, Augarten Palace in Vienna, 1688, 1692, a whitish palace. And in front of the palace, I like very much these exuberant, pupils, happy probably that vacation came. And it's in a way the stiffness, okay, the white stiffness of the palace behind, and the exuberance of the youth, throwing their hats in the air. And we should never forget these young people. We should never forget their energy when we design buildings, in my opinion, because they are life. They are the spring of life. Very nice. We shouldn't forget the flowers either, of course. And yes, the sky is rather cloudy, but there is some kind of a distant insinuation of the sunlight on the left. Another palace he built several, and we are going to see them. But in contrast with the palace, I also welcome this image where I see this tree contorted as it is, showing a different kind of sensibility. I like, aesthetically speaking, this tree very much. And who wouldn't? Although maybe those with the less appreciation for the anxiety of forms wouldn't. Another palace, 1692, Stratmann Palace in Vienna, an engraving, carriages, horses, and now cars, and less open space. It's a street. There is an embassy here or something. Many streets in Vienna do not have trees on them. Another palace, Lower Austria, 1693. This one more rural, if I am to say so. Still a palace, and I admire the kitchen. I wouldn't mind having my studio in such a so-called kitchen. It is a kitchen without so-called. Can you imagine those massive benches and massive tables? And can you imagine, the 10 or 20 cooks working for the owner of the palace? Not bad. Life can be beautiful indeed, if you are lucky. If you are not, you look at pictures. Salzburg. I don't know exactly what this is. It's this kind of a wall at the bottom of a rocky mountain, but it's impressive because it shows so-called classical culture, culture, mythological scenes, and then behind the wild nature, the rocks, the stones, the mountain. I guess the comparative preoccupations in the field of architecture that Johann Fischer von Erlach had help him to negotiate between dichotomical realities or entities, like here, nature and culture. There is tension between them, and they enhance each other, actually. Of course, he didn't build a block of flats on the right. Another palace, 1697. And the church, well, he built several in Salzburg. From 1699, St. Mark's Church in Salzburg, 1699. Very dramatic, the landscape in Salzburg, as you can see. Baroque architecture, that's what it is. It's strange in a way that, the Baroque, the very word was used, with connotations that were not always very uplifting, so to speak, because it was considered like an excessive curiosity, but so was considered, the Gothic, the Gothic art or architecture, like kind of an extravagance and eccentricity. But the Baroque is the Dionysian side of art, and Dionysus is necessary in life, just as Apollo is. We need both. He obviously loved architecture. He built, he created sculptures, he created graphic works. And I think this is what an artist should do. If the artist is also an architect, should build, should draw, should carve, should paint, should think, should write essays or poems. Another palace in Salzburg, 1700s, when some, contemporary cars, and the palace became a casino. The Holy Trinity Church, also in Salzburg, 1694, 1702. Magnificent trees. Fischer von Erlach. Collegiate Church in Salzburg, 1696, 1707, so 300 and some years ago. The Franciscan Church, High Altar in Salzburg, 1708. Now this picture, I like it very much, but I try to decipher its mystery. I'm not sure he built this. The structure is very impressive, but okay, the altar maybe belonged to him, but the church, I'm not sure. And I like the church very much. I mean, the structure of the roofing and you know, the columns is a very, very vigorous architecture, but I'm not sure he was the author of the building itself. Maybe he was just the author of the altar. Which is Baroque, yes. Another palace in Vienna, 1710, 1712. Too much whiteness, if you ask me. I'm not sure if that's how he intended his buildings. Maybe they are, you know, more recently painted in white. I don't know. Here in this engraving, you wouldn't easily imagine that the main facade was white, but in this picture, it is white. And there seems to be a contradiction somehow between the movement of the sculptural works and, you know, some dynamics of the Baroque architecture, and then this Apollonian whiteness. Bohemian court chancellery in Vienna, 1708, 1714. Now here we have color, but an unexpected one, this light pink. I'm not sure if this is what the architect initially wanted, but that's what it is now. This is one side of Vienna. There are other buildings with this pinkish, you know, appearance, talking about the bourgeois, you know, the waltzes and the grandmother. Schwarzenberg Palace, Vienna, 1720, 1722. Stolburg, 1723. And here we have the father and the son, both architects. So I'll show also a building built by the son, which was actually built in Romania, in Timișoara. Joseph Emanuel Fischer von Erlach. So this is the son, Joseph Emanuel Fischer von Erlach. Johann was the father. Joseph Emanuel Fischer von Erlach, this is the church he built in Timișoara. I understood he also built some kind of a palace somewhere in Transylvania. I don't have pictures with it, but this is the church he built in Timișoara, which this year has the honor to be the cultural capital of Europe. That's it.